Hello and welcome back. In this video we'll talk about ng modules, that is the most important change in Angular 2 RC5. I'll show you how they work first, and then we'll talk a bit more about why they made this change. So here I have the TypeScript version of the random quote application that we used at the start of the course. I've just updated all the Angular dependencies to RC5. Our code was written before RC5, so we have a main.ts file where we bootstrap app component. And in app component, we declare directives, in this case just random quote component, because we use it here in the template. Then we declare providers. For this application, we have this quote service that's not used in this component, but is used by the random quote component. Is injected in the constructor here. So in Angular 2 before RC5, app component typically declares all the services used in the application in the providers array, and each component declares which other components it uses in the directives array. This code still works with RC5. Our application is running just fine, as you can see. However, declaring directives and providers at the component level is deprecated and will be removed in the next release. And rather than bootstrapping our app component in main.ts, we should use an ng module instead. Let's see how to do that. First, we want to create a new file for our ng module. Let's call it app.module.ts. And here we need to import the ng module decorator from Angular core. Then we export a class named appModule, and we annotate the class with the ng module decorator that takes an object specifying the module metadata. So far, it's basically like creating a component, except that it's called module instead of component, right? The metadata for a module is different though. First, we have imports. Here we specify other modules we want to use in this module. At the minimum, we need the browser module that we can import from Platform Browser. So import browser module from Angular Platform Browser. And now we can put browser module in the imports array. Now this may be getting a bit confusing, so let me explain something. With the introduction of ng modules, there are now two kinds of modules, if you like. Angular Core and Angular Platform Browser are also modules, right? However, they are ES6 modules. They are part of the JavaScript language since ES6. You can use ES6 modules in any JavaScript application to split your code into separate files effectively. On the other hand, browser module and our own app module are ng modules. They are an Angular specific concept. In practice, they are classes annotated with the ng module decorator. Importing a name like a class or method from an ES6 module allows us to use that name in this file, while importing another ng module like browser module using this imports array has different effects. It means that in our app module we can use all the Angular components, services, and so on provided by the browser module. Browser module specifically provides all the basic functionality for an Angular application that runs in the browser. So in any Angular 2 web application, you will need this browser module. Next, we need to specify which components to bootstrap. And here we'll want to pass our app component that we need to import first. So import app component from app.component. Then list app component in the bootstrap array. Since with ng modules we bootstrap our component here in the module, we won't do that in main.ts anymore. We'll remove it from main.ts later. We also need a declarations property where we list all the components we have in our module. which in this example means all the components in our application, since our application has a single module, that is this app module. Here we certainly need app component. Even though we already specify it in Bootstrap, we also need to list it in the declarations. Then we need to add all the other components in our application. If we look at app component, here we use random quote component. So we can copy this import line and paste it into app module. Then add random quote component to the declarations. And we only have these two components in this example, but here you would declare not just components, but also directives and pipes if you have any. Finally, we need to specify the providers, just like we do in app component, where we provide quote service. In this case, the syntax is exactly the same, so we can copy this line and paste it into app module. Of course, we also need to import quote service, so let's copy the import line as well and add it to the app.module file. And that's it. That's our ng module complete for this simple application. So the app module imports other Angular modules like browser module, declares all the components that are part of this module in the declarations array, and then provides any services that are used in this module, and finally specifies which component should be bootstrapped. Since we declare all these things in the app module, they will be available to all the components in this module. We don't need to declare them at the component level anymore. In fact, we shouldn't do that because that's deprecated and won't be supported anymore from the next release. So in our app component, we don't need to import quote service and random quote component anymore, and we don't need to declare them as directives and providers. Now this will break our application. You can see that it's no longer showing a random quote, and that's because we also need to update our main.ts file. Here we don't want to bootstrap our app component anymore. Instead, we will bootstrap our app module. So let's import app module instead of app component. And we cannot use this bootstrap method either, that's also deprecated. Instead, we need to import the platform browser dynamic method from the platform browser dynamic ES6 module. Then instead of bootstrap, we call platform browser dynamic, and this method returns a platform ref. That's an object representing the platform running our app. In this case, the platform is the browser because we're using platform browser dynamic. And the platform ref object has a bootstrap module method that we can call passing our app module. So that's it. Our application should be working again. Yep, that's our random quotes. Now, using platform browser dynamic means we're using just-in-time template compilation. In other words, our Angular templates will be parsed and compiled only once they are loaded while our application is running. There is another option that is called ahead-of-time template compilation that should result in smaller code size and faster load times for our application. However, it's more complex to set up because it requires a build step to compile our templates and generate the code as part of the build process, so we'll look at it in a future video. Anyway, that's how to migrate a simple application to Angular 2 RC5 and ng modules. Create an app module class, annotate it with the ng module decorator, declare all your components in the declarations array, all services in providers, and that means you don't need to declare directives and providers at the component level anymore. Now, the main reason for introducing ng modules was ahead-of-time template compilation. By looking at this app module, for example, the Angular template compiler is able to know all the components used by our application. Without ng modules, the compiler would need a way to automatically detect which components are used, and that's not easy. However, ng modules also provide a nice way to group together a bunch of Angular 2 components, directives, and services so they can be reused by other ng modules. Up to a point that was also possible with ES6 modules, but ng modules allow us to use Angular-specific concepts like components and service providers, so they're a lot more convenient. And that's why I think ng modules are a great addition to Angular 2, even though I have to say it's pretty unusual to have such a big change in a version labeled Release Candidate 5. It makes you wonder how stable Angular 2 really is right now. That said, ng modules is certainly a good thing and something that will make Angular better in the medium and long term. That's all for now, and I'll see you later.